Rush fans had heard these drum parts for decades. They knew every fill, every accent, every impossible transition. They knew the sound of Neil Peart's drums almost like a voice. So when Anika Nilles sat behind that legendary drum kit, everyone was watching one question. Could anyone really honor Neil Peart's legacy without simply trying to copy him? For years, the idea of Rush continuing without Neil Peart felt impossible. Neil was more than the drummer. He was the architect behind some of the most complex and unforgettable rhythms in rock history. After his passing in 2020, many fans believed the story of Rush on stage was over. But when Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson decided to return for the 50-something tour, they faced the biggest challenge of their careers, finding someone who could step into a seat that was never meant to be filled. That person was Anika Nilles. A highly respected drummer, known for her technical skill and unique style, Anika wasn't chosen because she was another Neil Peart. She was chosen because she understood something important. Neil's playing was about emotion, creativity, and storytelling, not just hitting the right notes. And then came the moment Rush fans were waiting for. When she played one of Neil's most iconic classics, the reaction was unlike anything many expected. The crowd wasn't just listening to a drummer performing a song. They were witnessing a new chapter of Rush history being written. The room became quiet, because everyone knew the weight of that moment. This wasn't just another performance. It was Anika Nilles standing in front of millions of Rush fans, carrying the memory of the legendary Neil Peart and proving that honoring a legend doesn't always mean becoming a copy of one. But what happened next surprised even longtime fans. The first few seconds were enough to make every Rush fan pay attention, because playing a Neil Peart song is one thing. Playing it while knowing millions of people are comparing every movement, every fill, and every beat to the original drummer is something completely different. Anika Nilles understood the pressure. She wasn't walking onto the stage as someone trying to replace Neil Peart. Even Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson knew that was impossible. Neil's personality, creativity, and connection to Rush were a part of the band's identity for more than 4 decades. Instead, Anika had to do something much harder. She had to respect the past while bringing something of herself into the music. And that is exactly what caught fans off guard. Neil Peart's drumming was famous for precision. His performances were carefully constructed, almost like a composer building a piece of music. Every crash, every tom hit, and every rhythm had a purpose. But Anika's approach was different. She didn't try to hide her own style. She brought her own energy, her own feel, and her own interpretation, while still protecting the spirit of the original song. That balance was the reason many fans started looking at her differently. Before the performance, some people wondered if anyone could sit behind Neil's kit without facing impossible criticism. Rush fans are famously passionate, and Neil Peart's place in rock history is almost untouchable. But as the song continued, something changed. The comparisons became less important. People stopped asking, does she sound exactly like Neil? And they started asking, how does she make this music feel alive again? That was the moment Anika proved she understood what made Rush special. It was never only about technical perfection. It was about emotion. It was about storytelling through rhythm. And while the spotlight was on Anika, there was another powerful detail many fans noticed: the way Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson reacted beside her. Their expressions showed something important. They weren't searching for someone to replace their longtime friend. They were playing with a musician they trusted, a musician who respected the history behind every note. But the biggest test was still coming, because one Neil Peart classic would reveal whether Anika could truly connect with the heart of Rush fans, not just their ears. The biggest challenge for Anika Nilles wasn't learning the songs. For a drummer of her level, learning complex music was part of the job. She had already built a reputation as one of the most creative and technically impressive drummers in the world. The real challenge was something much deeper. She had to step into a musical legacy that meant everything to millions of people. Neil Peart wasn't just a drummer Rush fans admired. He was a symbol of dedication, discipline, and imagination. His drum solos became legendary because they told a story. They weren't just moments of speed and power. They were moments where the entire band's personality came through. And that was the standard Anika was facing. When she approached Neil's classic material, she didn't treat it like a museum piece. She didn't play it like something frozen in time. She played it like music. That difference mattered. Many fans noticed that Anika focused on capturing the feeling behind the songs rather than copying every single movement Neil made. She understood that a great drummer doesn't only keep time. A great drummer creates emotion. And slowly, the atmosphere began to change. Fans who were nervous before the performance started realizing something. They weren't watching someone take Neil Peart's place. They were watching someone celebrate what he created. That was the turning point. Because the hardest part about following a legend is knowing when to step forward and when to step back. Anika respected the history, but she also allowed herself to be heard. Her playing carried confidence, power, and personality. She brought a fresh energy to songs that fans had known for decades, while still honoring the foundation Neil built. And for many people watching, that was the moment the silence turned into appreciation. The same fans who once wondered if anyone could handle Rush's legendary drum parts began paying attention to the musician behind the kit. They saw the preparation, they saw the respect, and most importantly, they saw someone who understood that Neil Peart's legacy was never about creating another Neil Peart. It was about keeping the music alive. But then came the moment that truly tested Anika, the part of the performance where every Rush fan knew exactly what to listen for, and where even the smallest mistake would have been noticed. For Rush fans, there are certain drum moments that feel almost impossible to touch. These are the parts people studied for years, the fills that inspired generations of musicians. The sections where Neil Peart showed why he was considered one of the greatest drummers in rock history. So when Anika Nilles played those legendary parts, everyone was listening closely, not because they wanted her to fail, but because they wanted to know if the spirit of the music was still there. And that was the surprising part. Anika didn't approach the performance like she was trying to win a competition against Neil. She wasn't there to prove she was faster, louder, or more technical. She played with respect. Every movement showed that she understood the responsibility behind the songs. She knew fans weren't just hearing drums, they were hearing memories. For longtime Rush supporters, those songs were connected to concerts they attended, albums they grew up with, and moments in their own lives. That's why the reaction was so emotional. The crowd wasn't simply watching a replacement drummer. They were watching someone help bring a familiar piece of Rush back to life. And one of the biggest reasons the moment worked was because Anika brought something Neil always valued: musicality. Neil Peart's greatness was never only about complexity, it was about making every beat matter. His playing supported the story of the song, and Anika understood that. She didn't overwhelm the music, she served it. That approach earned respect from many fans who initially had doubts. Because sometimes the best way to honor a legend is not by standing in their shadow forever, it is by carrying the torch forward. And as the performance continued, something became clear. The audience wasn't comparing every second anymore. They were simply experiencing the music. The fear of who could ever play Neil's parts started fading, and a new question began appearing. What could Rush sound like in this new era? But there was still one thing everyone wanted to know. After the final notes faded, would Rush fans truly accept Anika Nilles as the drummer who helped write the next chapter of this legendary band? When the final moments of the performance arrived, something had changed. The tension that surrounded Anika Nilles stepping behind the drums was gone. The doubts, the questions, and the endless comparisons had slowly disappeared because fans finally saw the bigger picture. This was never about replacing Neil Peart. It was about celebrating what he left behind. For decades, Neil's drumming represented perfection, creativity, and dedication. He pushed himself constantly, studied every detail, and turned the drums into a voice of their own. That legacy was too important for anyone to simply imitate, and Anika understood that. Instead of chasing Neil's exact sound, she respected the foundation he created and added her own musical identity. That was what made the performance stand out. She didn't try to erase the past, she connected with it. Many fans who watched the moment saw something emotional happening on stage. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson weren't just performing old songs from the past, they were sharing them with someone who clearly understood their meaning. And that made the performance feel less like a comeback built around nostalgia. It felt like a tribute, a continuation, a reminder that great music can survive even after losing the people who created it. Anika's journey with Rush showed why choosing a new drummer was never going to be about finding another Neil Peart. There could only be one Neil. The goal was finding someone who could respect the history while bringing enough personality to make the songs feel alive again. And that is exactly what Anika brought. Her playing reminded fans that the magic of Rush was always bigger than one person. It came from the connection between musicians, the emotion inside the songs, and the memories created over generations. But the most powerful part of the night wasn't just what happened during the performance. It was what happened after. Because the reaction from fans revealed something unexpected. The person many people worried about accepting became the person many people were proud to see behind the kit. And that might have been the greatest tribute of all. In the end, the story of Anika Nilles playing a Neil Peart classic was never really about filling a seat behind a drum kit. It was about carrying a legacy. Because when someone becomes as important as Neil Peart became to Rush fans, the world naturally looks for someone who can recreate the past, someone who can make things feel exactly the way they used to. But that was never going to happen. Neil was one of one. His creativity, his writing, and his approach to drumming changed the way people viewed the instrument forever. So the only way forward was not to find another Neil Peart. It was to find someone who understood why Neil mattered. And that is where Anika Nilles made her impact. She didn't walk on stage trying to prove she was the new legend. She walked on stage as a musician who respected one. She understood that every beat carried history. Every fill carried memories. Every song carried decades of emotion from millions of fans around the world. And instead of being overwhelmed by that responsibility, she embraced it. That is why the moment became so powerful. Fans weren't silent because they were disappointed. They were silent because they were listening. They were watching someone take on one of the most difficult challenges in rock music and handle it with respect, confidence, and heart. The biggest compliment Anika could receive was not that she sounded exactly like Neil Peart. It was that she made people feel Rush again. And maybe that is the true meaning of honoring a legend, not copying their footsteps, but walking forward with the path they created. Neil Peart's music will always belong to him. But through musicians like Anika Nilles, the stories behind those songs can continue reaching new generations. And that is why, when Rush fans heard her play that classic, they weren't just hearing the past, they were hearing the future.